Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 23rd of March 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Welcome back, Mike. And behind the technical desk is Nick Green. Well, the weather here is supposed to be quite warm, around, 9 degrees, but it feels chillier than that in Plymouth. You could see your breath this morning. Reports across the country, much the same, grey, overcast, showery in Manchester, overcast and cold in Peterborough. Anybody's got anything more happier than that, please let us know.
Well, we had a happy event in Plymouth on Friday.
We did.
The Queen was here.
Indeed. She was rededicating the Navy's warship. Let us remember, that was HMS Ocean, so a helicopter carrier. And we'll be covering in the news that we've still got slight problems in Britain's Royal Navy due to a lack of aircraft carriers and several other pieces of essential kit. Okay, well, a reminder, first of all, that we are still working through videos from the conference. I know there's a lot of very keen people waiting for part 2 of the grand jury to come out. Grand jury part 1 will be up.
It is up.
It is up.
It is up.
Excellent. It is up on the British Constitution Group website today. Many people have been asking about that. Don't forget there is a part 2 to come out, and we're working on that. But immediately after the programme today, we'll be showing this gentleman, David Scott, who of course has been producing excellent reports on what's been happening north of the border, and he's also been reporting with great accuracy on the Holly Gregg abuse case. So there we are. We've just put this one up. If you want to go and have a look at the videos we've already posted, go and visit the British Constitution Group website. We think there are some very, very sinister things afoot in Britain, and we're going to continue to highlight those to our viewers and listeners. But let's just take a look at what the Mail is talking about. And really this is, sorry to use a pun, mirrors across the press. But we've got a mix of stories. Northern towns are the most desirable places to live. We've got Australia's Big Bang Theory. We've got we've got a birthday party in Mexico. We've got football fans. We've got a little bit on Al-Qaeda, of course, and we've got a bit on hundreds of Britain's jihadis. If we have a look at the Independent, then we've got a pretty amazing report. I think this is by Simon Danzuk, where people are saying that Harriet Harman is a beep knob. We've got Grant Shapps boasting, "I'm so rich about my car." The point we're making is the mainstream press and media simply swamped at the moment with dross as incredibly serious things take place with regard to politics and the Constitution.
Indeed. And, well, we'll start off with war. Because this is really the strongest rhetoric we've heard from Russia yet. And this is Russian ambassador to Denmark, Mikhail Vanin. And he wrote an opinion piece over the weekend and then followed that up with an interview in Jyllands-Posten. And he really was expressing Russia's concern that Denmark would join the NATO missile defence shield, so-called. And he said any build-up of a defensive potential would alter the strategic stability in Europe and be a direct threat to the existing nuclear balance. He said, if Denmark joins the missile defence system, which is controlled by the US, that means that Danish warships will be a target for Russian nuclear missiles. It is very important to know that. I don't think the Danes fully understand the situation. It will be harmful for the relationship between our countries, and there will be consequences if you join this missile defense system under American leadership. All who join will subsequently be a target for Russian ballistic missiles. You will be part of the threat against Russia. And really pretty strong words, Brian. And one of the things that the key points that he was trying to make here is that, really this so-called missile defense system isn't really anything to do with defence against some kind of rogue state. And he said, in fact, if it is a defence against a rogue state, then why isn't Russia involved in this initiative? Why isn't it a joint NATO-Russian initiative if it's really about some kind of rogue state like Iran? So he's arguing that that's not the case and that it's not really defensive, and strongly making the point that, of course, anybody that joins in with that then becomes a target for Russian ballistic nuclear missiles.
Well, you've got an extraordinary situation at the moment, Mike. We have heard from a number of different sources that, of course, President Putin is in a very difficult position at the moment. He regards the political administration in Britain now as out of control. People who simply are not living in the real world, making up essentially propaganda about the terrorist threat. And so Putin is saying, can we really deal with the British administration at the moment? And same thing is happening on the American side. What is Obama really up to? And of course, dropped out of the press, as we can see by the dross I've just shown. The British press and media are simply not focusing now on all of the military activity that's been driven right up to Russia's borders. Well, have a look at this, because we've got the press boasting, and what are they doing? Well, they're using an American carrier to do it. So we've got the USS Theodore Roosevelt, 100,000 tons of American aircraft carrier, too big to get into the naval base in Portsmouth. So one stage was anchored very close to the coast. And of course, this is a monster of a ship. This is what true aircraft air power is about at sea. And while we're looking at that American warship, of course, we should remember that David Cameron destroyed Britain's carrier capacity. So we've got no operational aircraft carriers and no aircraft to go on the carriers once they become operational. And yet we've got David Cameron warning of conspiracy theories, terrorism and the Russian threat. So this is exactly what the UK column has predicted time and time again. David Cameron ramps up the rhetoric for war and violence overseas. Whose military is he going to use? Who's going to take the casualties? Always going to be American military personnel. And stay with the conspiracy theory there, which we've mentioned, because we're going to come on to that further a little later in the news today.
Economy.
Well, that's why we've lost all the ships, because there's no money, of course.
Well, certainly no money in Greece. So the Greek Prime Minister is off to Germany today to meet Herr Merkel. And although Mrs. Merkel acknowledged last week that they would talk and perhaps argue during this meeting today, she said it would not be a defining moment. So that should have calmed down the markets, perhaps. Most of the mainstream media on this subject focusing on the fact that the Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, wrote to Merkel last week, really pointing out that the debt obligation that Greece faces is impossible for them to make the payments, and indeed it is. So he's highlighting once again that the choice for Greece is between making payments to the IMF or spending money on their own people to keep their own people alive, and really he's saying that that is an impossible choice to make. So we'll see what happens later on when they have their little meeting, whether Mrs. Merkel gives in a little bit and releases some of the 7.2 billion euros that's being held back at the moment from the Greek government. And we've got to always keep in mind, of course, that this has got nothing whatever to do with Greek debt. This is about the banks.
The banks and massive global banking fraud or money made from nothing.
Indeed. Now, in the meantime, back in the UK, of course, they are, the Express here, making the point that inflation continues to fall, and they're suggesting that it's going to fall to 0.1%. At least that'll be the figure announced this month for last month. And the Express here saying what a great thing this is. This is absolutely fantastic. Inflation down to an all-time low. And so what's driving this? Well, the big four grocers, according to the Express, are continuing to slash prices amid fierce competition from Aldi and Lidl. And they're saying that Morrison's cut the cost of 100 shopping basket staples by 22% last month. Really, this is great news for everybody, isn't it? Well, actually not, because what this represents is the collapse really, because what we're seeing is that people aren't buying anything. That's why the prices are falling. Of course, fuel prices are part of that. That's outside the control of most of us. But nonetheless, many of the utilities companies very slow to pass those fuel prices on. So we're only starting to see the effect of that now. But the main driver being food, and when people are stopping buying food and retailers having to cut prices just to compete with the cut price with the other cut price retailers, then that's a pretty serious situation. But in the meantime, how are we paying for this non-inflation? PricewaterhouseCoopers here today releasing this report. Unsecured debt set to rise to nearly £10,000 per household by the end of 2016. And what this really demonstrates is that people in Britain have completely failed to learn the lesson of 2007, 2008. They're borrowing more and more. Of course, not much of this borrowing being caused by the fact that they're being forced to borrow, but some of it certainly isn't. Some of it is because debt is being sold to them on the basis of low interest rates. PricewaterhouseCoopers saying that people are borrowing more because they're confident in their job prospects, so that's good in time for the election. But nonetheless, it's still a ridiculous situation that we've got. This is only unsecured debt, and let's not worry about the secured debt on top of that. Let's not worry about the government debt that still exists, and let's not worry about all the corporate debt that's out there, or the pensions debt, or any of the other debt, because we don't have to worry about any of that.
Okay, I'm just going to remain silent because it's obvious what's going on here.
Well, indeed.
People are caught in the rat trap, and that trap is going to be closed by the whole system being collapsed fairly shortly.
Indeed. Anyway, over in the United States then, there's a presidential election sort of starting to, they don't leave it to the last 2 weeks to start campaigning. They actually start campaigning about 2 years ahead. Of course, Hillary Clinton, damaged badly by the email scandal over the last couple of months. And a new name has popped up, Martin O'Malley, and he's likely to be the favourite if Clinton decides not to run. Now, he is former Maryland governor, and really actually not that well known, but still finding himself right at the head of the race. So why is this significant? Well, because he is absolutely putting the campaign for Glass-Steagall right at the heart of his campaign for the presidency. And what he's saying is here, this is in a blog post that he put in the Des Moines Register over the weekend. He's saying, the most serious structural reform we can make is reinstating the 1933 Glass-Steagall Act that kept commercial banks separate from investment banks. Under Glass-Steagall, our country did not see a major financial crisis for nearly 70 years. If that law hadn't been replaced in 1999, the crash would have been contained. The largest banks should be broken up into more manageable institutions. Today, 5 banks control half of the financial industry's $15 trillion in assets. Even members of Congress, several Federal Reserve Board governors, and major players in the financial industry are recognizing that institutions that are too big to fail are also too big to succeed. Structural reforms aren't enough. We must bring fundamental change to the culture of Wall Street, beginning with real accountability. To this day, the Justice Department and financial regulators have done virtually nothing to bring criminal charges or hold leadership accountable. Legal departments are critical for improving the culture of Wall Street and showing that fraudulent behaviour will be punished. And he continued that over the weekend as he was campaigning in Iowa, and he gave a speech during that campaign, which was broadcast live on C-SPAN, and again calling for the reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall Act. So this is a pretty important development that somebody who is actually a serious, credible potential for the presidency is talking along these lines, and I hope he makes a bit of progress.
That will be interesting to watch. Well, clampdown in America, clampdown here. It's becoming quite interesting what information is coming to the surface. And this has been circulating on Twitter, and it's a report about a gentleman called Arthur Donaldson, and a photograph here showing Arthur Donaldson in his kilt. But who's he with? And he's with some Nazi youth. And the text underneath is giving some background history to this man who essentially thought that basically he could help to undermine the partnership with England, break apart United Kingdom by getting into bed with the Nazi Party. And so the debate here is that are there still undertones of this sort of fascist sympathy within SNP? And we've reported over the last few days, certainly, that people have been talking more and more about the aggressive bullying nature of Alex Salmond's and Sturgeon's SNP. So, as always, we're going to say perhaps our viewers will do a little bit of digging into that to see what can be found. But it is interesting, excuse me, that we are seeing across UK a clamping down on the ordinary man and woman and an increasingly belligerent public sector. And how better to stress that than to take a look at what Plymouth's very own police have been tweeting out. Have a look at this remarkable piece here. We've got still my favourite, fairly clear message. And this is an advert from Devon and Cornwall Police. Don't get up, we'll let ourselves in. And of course, here we've got almost a fascist dressed police officer, all in black, ready to smash your front door in. Now, if we follow it through, we've said arrogant, brutish and nearly out of control. We understand that Britain's police are now set to get new look black paramilitary uniforms. We were told this about the middle of last week. We're pretty certain this is true. We're seeing the steady march to turn Britain's police into a paramilitary force. And let's remember, they're not just capable of smashing in front doors, they're also capable of killing people. The police officer, of course, in Plymouth, who was stupid enough to fire his taser at a man who doused himself in petrol, was, of course, found not guilty of any misconduct in the subsequent investigation. So I'm going to say here, to my mind, this is Nazi Germany coming in quietly, slowly. We've described it in the latest UK column as the drip, drip, drip of anaesthetic. Very dangerous stuff. Well, can we rely on our press to report the truth? We've occasionally stuck up for Britain's journalists, saying they're beginning to wake up, but it's a very mixed picture. And we thought today, for crass reporting, we'd focus on the Daily Mail. And here is their unbelievable article, "The Yummy Mummy, a Satanic Sex Cult and the Smears That Terrorised a Very Swish London Suburb. Yoga teacher forced her children to make false abuse allegations against teachers, priests and their own father." It's quite a headline, so we decided that we would actually phone the Daily Mail to see whether we could speak to the journalists concerned. And the journalists are Paul Bracci, Tim Stewart and Stephanie Condron. Well, we managed 2 out of the 3. Let's have a look at some of the information we were given. We were told very clearly that Paul Bracci is the lead for the story. He was assisted by a so-called researcher, Tim Stewart, and Stephanie Condron was merely a contributor to the article. She got a little bit squeamish when I asked her some basic questions, and she was very quick to distance herself from the story. An outrageous story which simply smears and undermines the mother and prints pictures of her in her bikini as part of that smear process. Well, the Daily Mail team had not met either the mother or her partner. Quite extraordinary stuff. They said very clearly that, well, it's easy to run a story on a court judgment because then we don't have to worry about our own legal team. They told me that the Daily Mail team were happy with Judge Palfrey's attack on the medical evidence of abuse. They didn't have a problem with that at all. And basically, in the limited discussion before they got quite hostile, they revealed a pathetic knowledge, really, about what child abuse is about, the scale of it, and the sheer cover-up, perjury, lies, falsification of reports that goes on inside family court hearings. So these so-called mainstream journalists, we can reveal, simply wrote a story based on what the judge said from this terrible case and what they had picked up online. They had apparently spoken to some of the parents at the school, and of course the parents had said, well, we haven't done anything. So the Daily Mail said, well, that's okay then.
Bit like Oxford and Cherwell Valley College.
Very similar to Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. Now, we have said we're going to continue to report on this case. We covered a little bit in the news last week. This was sent through to me shortly before we started the news today, just to say that that snippet had, on one source alone, already got nearly 3,000 views. We're going to continue to fight for the truth about child abuse in Hampstead. And we think that it can best be done using really this as an example. What sort of thing do we need to look at? Well, we think we need to know exactly what did take place in what were secret court hearings. We want to know why the police coached the children. It's very clear from the videos of the police in action that the children were coached to retract their statements. We want to know what actual investigations the Met Police carried out into the abusers of the children, on the basis the medical report showed very clearly the children had suffered sexual abuse. We would like to know why the judge attacked the medical reports and indeed the doctor producing it, even particularly as it demonstrated the children had been abused. We want to know why there has been no criminal court case, why this has been held in a very secretive family court with just one judge. And we'd like to know why the Daily Mail and others have printed sensationalist smear stories. And also we would like to know why Metropolitan Police officers were threatened to back away from this case. So when we have a look at the facts around the Hampstead abuse case, isn't it amazing we can see the threats, the intimidation, the lies, the false reports, the secret courts. It's like Hollygregg south of the border, Mike.
It did stagger me, some of the responses from the journalists, and you've got to ask what goes through somebody's mind as a journalist when they're looking at a story like this and they don't actually do the work to find out, objectively what the story is about before they print something like that.
Well, it's sloppy journalism. Of course, they're all being paid to do a proper job. And actually, what I've learned from talking to the Daily Mail reporters this morning is they're simply going on the internet and trying to cruise off the back of all of the work that some very good people have done to post up factual information about what happened around Hampstead. So I'm going to say that I was absolutely appalled at the gross lack of knowledge by those Daily Mail journalists, and for them to simply be almost laughing that, well, of course, the moment the judge made a judgment, that meant we didn't really have to pay attention to what we printed. So we printed effectively nearly a full-page smear article on the mother and her partner. When I attempted to discuss wider aspects of child abuse, how many children were abused in Britain, why there was no central database of statistics of children abused in care, the journalists simply didn't want to know. In fact, they couldn't get off the phone fast enough.
So, I mean, it makes cover-up so much easier if journalists aren't doing their jobs.
Well, I think as we're going to show a little bit later in the news, Mike, if journalists don't get off their armchairs or get out of their armchairs and start to do some serious reporting, I think they're in for a big shock. I think a lot of our mainstream journalists at the moment have just got used to living in a cosy country, but there's something very nasty brewing. And as I've said to many mainstream journalists, some of the first people to die in dictatorships are actually investigative journalists. So we'll wait and see. Well, talking of investigative journalists, let's have a look at Ixaro. This is the very interesting organisation that 1 minute is fighting for child abuse, the next minute is providing witnesses against people who've come forward to talk about child abuse. And it was our very own Exaro, of course, that says that it's put witnesses forward to destroy evidence by and allegations by Ben Fellows. Well, have a look at this headline: BBC at war over Panorama on claims of VIP network. And the date of this is the 22nd of March. It is an article worth reading because they describe a war going on between BBC staff and the Panorama team. But we just like to point out that actually it was the UK column that broke the Panorama story on the 11th of March 2015 when we said that Panorama had been basically bought in order to do a smear investigation on anybody who was starting to expose child abuse. So which side is Exaro on? Well, one day they are there for the abuse victims. The next day they're there to help prosecutions in the court. You make your own mind up. But this was the meat of their article. Credit where it's due. Have a look at this. Because the man who was going to run the Panorama investigation was none other than David Aranovich, a columnist on the Times, well known for dismissing claims about paedophile VIPs as conspiracy theory. And in 2003, there was an article by him in The Observer, which, according to Exaro, his article attempted to diminish the seriousness of child porn. Just note this little term here. He says that if you're talking about paedophile VIPs, members of parliament, establishments, you're dealing in conspiracy theory. Well, why is that important? Because have a look at this 21st Century Wire with a very, very informative article warning that the French Prime Minister, François Hollande, delivered an official declaration. This is the French state now starting to say that they need more rules and regulations and law to clamp down on speech and thought crimes. And Patrick Henningsen says, ironically, in order to achieve this fascist leap forward, Hollande has equated conspiracy theories to Nazism. So here we have the state. If you talk about child abuse rings, fact, you are in fact a conspiracy theorist, and that makes you equivalent to a Nazi. This is inversion of truth. And of course, the moment you invert truth, what you're really dealing with is something utterly evil and very dark. If you want to read the article, do visit 21st Century Wire, and here it is: France moves to make conspiracy theories illegal by government decree. What do you think we ought to say on that, Mike? It's very, very dangerous, the speed at which this is coming in.
Well, shutting down free speech. You look at a lot of the rhetoric from Theresa May today with regard to Islamic extremism, and of course, if you actually analyse what she's saying round the edges, they may be saying it's about Islamic extremism, but in fact they're talking about other forms of what they consider extremist thought, and that includes people that are pushing so-called conspiracy theories. Very, very dangerous.
Very dangerous indeed. Well, if we've hammered the male guardians, let's have a look at these four gentlemen as if we hammered the male, let's have a look at these four gentlemen reported in The Guardian. This is why there is a massive attempt to get rid of common law and the jury, because these four journalists were acquitted by a jury of taking payments for stories. I encourage you to read this article because basically The Guardian quite rightly says the acquittals will be seen as a major blow to the Crown Prosecution Service, which has so far brought to trial 24 journalists from The Sun and other tabloids as part of the Operation Elvedon investigation into payments by newspapers for stories. And let's remember who stirred up the hatred against Britain's press and media. Well, of course, it was none other than
Lord Leveson. Now, as we reported in January this year, he produced a review of the efficiency in criminal proceedings. And one of the things that he had mentioned in Chapter 10 of this report, in fact, was the need to get rid of juries in many cases because they're just too expensive. So I'm quite certain that agenda is absolutely still on the cards. But one of the other things that he mentioned in this report is now happening right in front of our eyes. Drivers plead guilty online to save time in courts, and basically what this means is that in fact you get accused of a so-called minor offence like speeding or driving without insurance. You will be offered the opportunity to plead guilty by clicking a button on a website. So this scheme began in Manchester as a pilot. It's now being extended nationally. And it could be extended to other offences. Now, ministers have yet to decide which other offences the scheme might extend to, but what are the limits here? Is it going to extend to rape, murder? Where's it going to end?
Drinking on the streets, littering. They'll come in the soft things
the soft
first,
stuff first, and
stuff,
it's just going to gradually increase. So they're saying that this is aimed at cutting time and costs, and also aimed at modernising the court system. So you can decide for yourself what modernising the court system means, but to my mind it means a further undermining of common law and our constitution, and a further shortcut at every opportunity. Now, we've been talking, Guy Taylor's been talking about how the court procedure rules are being absolutely shortcut certainly with regard to civil court procedure rules. This seems to me is going to lead to similar shortcuts in the criminal court procedure rules. These rules are there for our protection, and we lose them at our peril.
Indeed, I'll just say I wasn't able to get it prepared in time, but I wanted to put up another shot of the police, which was given to me this morning. And it was, again, local. This was Devon and Cornwall police, but the traffic police out with their speed gun. Who's using the speed gun? 7 or 8 year old girls. So police getting into the schools, getting the children involved. So you have a child as part of the team stopping motorists for speeding. This is nudging. The children are being encouraged to trust the police. Well, we know there's big problems there. But of course, the children are becoming tools of the state. We can have children spying on their parents who might of course be speeding. Very dangerous stuff.
Okay, and finally here from me, we've got a report from Oxford University here asking the question, are there links between party donations and peerage nominees? Well, I think that's pretty obvious that there have been for quite some time, but what's actually going on here? Well, they are demonstrating scientifically, I suppose you might say, that they have found that there is a link between money donated to political parties and the people that are then subsequently nominated as life peers, and they're arguing that in fact what's effectively happening is that peerages are being bought. And of course this is another attempt to undermine the House of Lords, because what we need is a complete reform of the House of Lords. Well, in fact we do need reform of the House of Lords, but what we need is to have it returned to the way it was prior to 1911, rather than throwing out the House of Lords that we have at the moment and ending up with an elected second chamber, which is subject to the same whipping system as the House of Commons. So in effect, we have absolutely no limitation on the power of the House of Commons as a result. So what is being proposed for House of Lords reform is not an American-style Senate, and it's certainly not a hereditary peers type pre-1911 House of Lords. An independent House of Lords. It is a pretty nasty House of Lords. We're in a pretty bad situation at the moment with regard to the House of Lords, but what's being proposed is even worse. This is part of that agenda.
Okay. Well, credit where it's due. We'd like to thank the various people that have come forward over the last couple of weeks to tell us what's really going on in the country. And one of the big topics is what life is now like inside the Metropolitan Police. We're going to say very reliable sources are telling us that it's becoming a madhouse. On one hand, we have police officers who've clearly been involved in the abuse of children and the paedophile rings. They are becoming extremely scared as they start to anticipate that they could be found out, brought to justice, and of course put in prison. To be in prison for child abuse is one thing. To be in prison for child abuse as an ex-copper is, of course, a very dangerous thing. So we understand sweating policemen within the Metropolitan Police, mid-ranking officers who yet have not got the courage to speak out the truth about what's happening, senior officers who are blatantly involved in the cover-up of the abuse, and they are doing it to protect establishment figures and indeed politicians. We are aware that the videos of abuse of children by politicians exist. The photographs of the abuse of children by politicians exist. But despite all of this hard evidence, we are still seeing a stunning lack of action by Britain's police. They're going to be caught in the rat trap. And of course, the other thing that our sources told us is it's becoming very clear that the politicians and the establishment will do everything to deflect attention away from the political abusers onto anybody they can. So if you're a member of the media, you're a star from yesteryear, you are extremely vulnerable because they are going to go for more celebrities. And indeed, as Theresa May has said, we're going to bring policemen into courts for not only abuse of children, but their failures to protect children. So the word from within the Met Police is that politicians now looking for every opportunity to deflect attention. And indeed, this is where the dreadful scam has come from Panorama. We can expect the BBC to cover up child abuse. We've only got to look at Savile inquiry, Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, or indeed Beechwood. BBC and Nottingham simply failed to get engaged. So the BBC's plan was to unleash a massive attack on anybody daring to talk about child abuse. Now it appears that that's come undone, so there's trouble within the BBC. But we were also told several weeks ago we could expect the mainstream press to start attacking anybody who was talking about child abuse. And I just wonder whether the Daily Mail article was the start of that. Well, we leave you to think about it. What can we do about all of this? Well, let's expose things. We have to get the bad stuff out into the open. We have to tell the truth. We have to encourage whistleblowers. And it's up to each and every one of us. It's not enough to sit back and allow others to do it. The British Constitution Group is there to expose what's going on and bring people together. I'm just going to bring up David Scott. Here is a man who realised what was happening, started to seek out other people, and my goodness, he's now doing some tremendous work north of the border. We need many other people like David, and if you want more information, then do have a look at the British Constitution Group website.
Yeah, so that panel discussion from the second day of the BCG conference going out straight after this programme. At 7:30 tonight, then we've got the Crane Report, and then after the Crane Report will be the repeat of this news, followed by Fracking Nightmare, and then we'll repeat the panel discussion from the conference. So a packed live schedule tonight.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for joining us. Don't get depressed. Action conquers fear. Get out there, start to spread the word, and start to tell your friends, neighbours, and anybody else you can what's really happening in Britain today. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.